Chapter 6. The seasons had changed quickly from autumn to winter. The trees that were full of burgundy and yellow leaves that slowly fell to the ground were bare, and snow blanketed the city. Thanksgiving had come and gone, and Chicago was prepping for Christmas. There were Santa Clauses ringing their bells on every corner, and the department stores were full of people shopping for their families and loved ones. Everywhere you looked, there were red, green, and gold ribbons tied around poles and wreaths hanging on doors. The children built snowmen with raisin eyes and carrots for the noses. Snowball fights and sliding on frozen ice in the street became a holiday sport. Good morning was replaced with Merry Christmas, and you could smell the wonderful aromas of roasted chestnuts and hot corn on the cob being sold by street merchants. With the wind blowing the snow in every direction, people walking with packages, and children playing, the city looked like a shaking snow globe. Once a year, the city of Chicago turned into a winter wonderland, and its inhabitants embodied the spirit of kindness and generosity. It was Christmas time. Christmas at Pearly Days was always special, because the family always celebrated together at the diner. Everyone was busy filling orders for Miss Pearl's Christmas turkeys and glazed hams. Helena came back to work during the season to fill the orders for her delicious pies and cakes. The diner made a fortune this time of year, and this allowed the family to spoil each other with gifts. Miss Pearl would close the diner at noon, and every year the men folk, Mr. Stage, Mr. George, Teddy, and Pete, would go out and bring home a Christmas tree while the women prepared a magnificent feast. Later they would sing Christmas carols as they trimmed the tree, and laughter filled the air. Christmas Eve had finally arrived, and the women of Pearly Days was getting the food prepared for dinner. Miss Pearl made the turkey and ham. Miss Peaches made the macaroni and cheese and potato salad. Miss Lucy made the candied yams. Helen made the collard greens and the cornbread dressing. And Helena was in charge of all the cakes and pies. Leela was in the front decorating and setting the table. "Oh, Leela, the table looks wonderful," said Miss Pearl when she walked to the front of the diner. Leela smiled with pride. "Thanks, Miss Pearl. Now all we need is the Christmas tree. It's sure taking the fellas a long time getting it here." Miss Pearl looked out the window and saw the heavy snow falling. "It looks like the start of a blizzard. I hope Teddy and Pete don't get stuck carrying a tree in all this snow," she said. Leela walked over to the window. "I hope they get here soon," she said. Miss Pearl looked at Leela. "Don't start worrying, gal. Teddy and Pete been in worse weather than this. And the last thing we need is for your water to break 'cause you worrying for nothing," she said. "Miss Pearl is right. No need in getting yourself all worked up for nothing. I came in here to tell you I got some sweet potato pies cooling. Go on and get yourself a nice big slice. Go on now," Helena said to Leela. Leela smiled and went to the kitchen. "You want some coffee, Miss Pearl?" Helena asked. "Damn the coffee. Grab some glasses. I got some hooch stored away in the cabinet. Let me go get it," Miss Pearl replied. Helena placed 2 glasses on the counter and laughed. "You and your holiday hooch. Or should I say white lightning?" Helena teased. "You can call it whatever you want, but what you can't call it is nasty," Miss Pearl said. Then she poured herself and Helena a snootful. "This is the best tasting hooch in Chicago," Helena said. "Don't I know it?" Miss Pearl responded. They both clicked their glasses together and laughed. Just then, the door flew open, and Teddy, Pete, and Marco were all carrying the Christmas tree inside. "So this is what the women folk do when us men are out there struggling through the snow to get the Christmas tree home?" Teddy said. "What they doing?" Pete asked. "From the looks of things, getting loaded," Marco replied. Helena laughed. "Leela, they're back," Miss Pearl yelled. All the women ran to the door. "Well, it's about time. We never had to wait this long when George and Mr. Stage went to pick out a treat with you," Miss Peaches said. I thought you guys were stuck in the snow for sure, Leela said. If it wasn't for Marco, we probably would have been, Teddy responded. Marco, what are you doing here? Helena asked. I was on my way to Uncle Luigi's after I ran some errands and saw these two scoundrels trying to fix a busted wheel in this crazy weather. So I helped push their wagon off the road, had them put the tree in my wagon, brought them here, and saved the day, Marco replied. Well, I'm glad to see you, my hero, Helena said. I hate to tell you this, but it looks like you're not going to make it to your Uncle Luigi's house no time soon, Helen said as she looked out the window. I know, the weather's getting worse by the minute. I could barely see what was in front of me. Looks like we're staying put until this blizzard blows over, Marco said. Helena pulled Marco off to the side away from everyone. Your mama is going to have a fit when you don't show up, she said. I ran into one of my uncle's neighbors and asked him to let them know that I would be late and why, so at least they won't worry. Besides, seeing you is the highlight of my day, he said. Helena laughed. I would tell you to give her a call, but the telephone lines are down. But to tell you the truth, I'm happy you're here, Helena said. Let's start trimming the tree, Leela yelled with excitement. Good idea. Blizzard or no blizzard, it's still Christmas Eve, and we're all here together, which is more than I can say for a lot of folks during this time of the year, Miss Peaches said. And for the rest of the night, they sang Christmas carols, drank hooch, laughed hard, ate plenty, and had the best time. Meanwhile, in Mr. Luigi's house, the neighbor knocked on the door and passed on the message that Marco told him to Mr. Luigi. Mr. Luigi went to join Stella and Sophie in the dining room. That was Anthony from across the street. He said that he ran into Marco helping his friends whose wagon was stuck in the snow with a busted wheel haul their Christmas tree to their house, and that he would get here as soon as he can. But judging by the weather, he won't make it here until this blizzard is over, he said. What friends? Stella sarcastically asked. Pete and Teddy. You've met Pete. You mean the black boy that's going with that gal's twin sister? Yep, that's Pete. And that gal, as you call her, name is Helena, Mr. Luigi said. I know what her name is, my dear brother. And how you can just sit there all smug while your nephew is being tricked into spending the holiday away from his family is a mystery to me, she said. Mr. Luigi laughed. You're getting very dramatic in your old age, Stella. Marco is not being tricked by Helena. And being trapped inside on Christmas Eve during a blizzard is not exactly what someone would call the entire holiday. And it's no mystery that he'd rather spend this time with her. Now, will you please go to the kitchen and help Sophie with the food? I'm starving, he said. Stella rolled her eyes and went to the kitchen. I'll help you serve, Sophie. Marco won't be here tonight, Stella said. I know. I overheard the neighbor and Mr. Luigi talking, Sophie said. Tell me, Sophie, how do you feel about it? Stella asked. I feel relieved, Sophie replied. Relieved? Stella asked. Why, yes. Relieved that Marco is somewhere safe and not out there in the blizzard somewhere, Sophie replied. Well, of course I'm glad he's not out there freezing in the cold. But what I don't like is that he's with her on Christmas Eve, Stella said. Sophie rolled her eyes and said, It's not a competition, Stella. Oh, yes, it is. And she's winning, Stella said. The next day on Christmas morning, the terrible winds had stopped and the men were out shoveling the sidewalks, making it safe for folks to walk. Marco and Helena were up drinking coffee and looking out the window. I think it's time for me to get a move on. I'll go to the stable and hitch up the team, Marco said. Yeah, before your mom starts to think I'm holding you hostage, Helena said. Marco laughed. You and that smart mouth of yours sure sounds a lot like my mama. You know, all differences aside, you two are a lot alike, he teased. Bite your tongue, Helena snapped back. The holidays were over and winter made way for spring. Once again, Chicago began to thaw, and Chicagoans switched from wearing snow boots to wearing galoshes and carrying umbrellas. Spring was also the season that Leela gave birth to a beautiful baby girl who Teddy proudly named Georgia. Helena fell head over heels for baby Georgia from the first time she laid eyes on the pretty dark brown infant with the almond-shaped honey-colored eyes. Yes, baby Georgia brought joy to the lives of the Pearly Day family, and it showed on all their faces. The positive energy even reached the home of the Petrillos, although they did not have the slightest clue. Helena was overjoyed, and because of this, Marco was happier and spent the time he did spend with his family making them laugh, which in return made Stella feel more at ease. One day, Stella was out shopping and decided to stop and buy her brother some pipe tobacco. When she entered the store, she noticed a little black boy waiting at the counter. Then the store owner and longtime friend of the family, Donatelli, walked from the back of the store. "Why, Stella, as I live and breathe. Donatelli, it's been too long. How are you, my friend?" Stella asked. "Couldn't be better. What can I do for you?" he asked. "Well, I've been in such a good mood lately that I decided since I'm out shopping, why not stop and get my brother some of that special blend tobacco you make that he likes so much." "Isn't that nice? You're just an old softy is what you are," Donatelli teased. Stella laughed. Donatelli was good looking. Always have been ever since Stella could remember. She always flirted with him, and this time was no exception. Donatelli looked at Charlie, the little black errand boy. "Here you are, Charlie," he said as he handed Charlie a tin of snuff. "Thanks, Mr. Donatelli. See you next time," Charlie replied. Then Donatelli turned to Stella. "Luigi's special blend is stored downstairs. I'll go get it," he said. "Okay, take your time," Stella said. When Donatelli walked to the back, Stella stopped Charlie at the door. "Aren't you a little too young to be dipping snuff?" she asked. "Oh, it's not for me, ma'am. I picked this up for Marco." "Well, I'm Marco's mother, and I happen to know for a fact he doesn't dip snuff, boy," Stella snapped. "This snuff is not for Marco, ma'am. It's for Helena," Charlie said. This surprised Stella to say the least. "Oh, and you're dropping it off to Marco?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. I leave it at the game house so Helena can get it when she comes to run the card tables," Charlie replied. Then Stella reached inside her pocketbook and took out about $1 in change. "Didn't mean to be so nosy. I just wanted to make sure you wasn't dipping snuff. You're much too young. Here, take this, and don't mention to anyone that we had this conversation. Marco already thinks I'm a busybody, and I don't want him upset with me, okay?" Charlie took the money with a big smile on his face. "I won't tell. Thank you, ma'am," he said. Then he opened the door and ran out. A minute later, Donatelli walked up. "Here you are, beautiful," he said as he began to bag up the tobacco. Stella blushed. "I almost forgot how pretty your tins are, Donatelli. Even in New York, there's no comparison," she said. "Ah, yes. They are one of a kind, made from copper. You won't find them anywhere else," Donatelli said proudly. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. "For you, I'll take off 20%. Consider it a pretty lady discount," he replied. "Oh, Donatelli, you are still quite the charmer," she said. After Stella left Donatelli's store, she thought about the information Charlie gave her. "I can't believe my son likes a nigger bitch that dips snuff. I should have never left him here with Luigi," she thought to herself. Once Stella left the store, Donatelli walked to the back where Sophie was patiently waiting. "So you gave her a pretty lady discount, huh?" Sophie teased. Donatelli smiled. "Stella and I have always talked to each other like that. It's just harmless flirting. You, my love, have absolutely nothing to be jealous of," Donatelli replied. Sophie pouted, crossed her arms, and said, You was laying it on a little thick if you ask me. Donatelli grabbed her by the waist and said, I love only you. Sophie smiled and said, and I love you too. Later on the ride home, Sophie thought about Stella's visit to Donatelli's store. When Donatelli went downstairs to get Mr. Luigi's tobacco, Sophie crept closer to the front to hear what Stella was saying to Charlie. Stella had always been nosy, so Sophie was not surprised at how she was questioning him. But what concerned Sophie was Stella paying Charlie to keep quiet about what he told her. It seemed rather odd and did not sit well with Sophie because she knew Stella never did anything without a motive. A month later, Marco was over his uncle's house having supper with his family when the phone rang just as the food was being served. Mr. Luigi, Donatelli wants to talk to you. He said it's an emergency, Sophie said with a worried look on her face. Mr. Luigi quickly walked to the kitchen and grabbed the phone. Donatelli, what's the matter? We'll get to the bottom of it, my friend. Don't worry, I'm on my way, he said. Mr. Luigi hung up the phone, returned to the dining room and looked at Marco. Donatelli's store has been robbed. Is he okay? Marco asked. He's a little shaken up, but he's fine. I'm on my way down there, Mr. Luigi said. I'll go with you, Marco replied. When Marco and Mr. Luigi returned home, Sophie and Stella could not wait to hear what happened. Is everything all right? Stella asked. Yes, Donatelli wasn't there when it happened, which is a good thing. Oh, thank God, Stella said. But it's the strangest thing. With all the expensive hand-carved pipes and beautifully painted ashtrays, the thieves only took the special blended tobacco and snuff, Mr. Luigi replied. Yeah, I thought that was strange too. They didn't even touch the cash register or the safe, Marco added. That is strange, Sophie said. I'm really glad Donatelli wasn't there. He could have been hurt, Stella said. Well, Donatelli might not have been hurt physically, but monetary-wise, now that's a different story, Mr. Luigi said. What do you mean? Stella asked. He means that Donatelli made the bulk of his money from selling his special tobacco blends. He says it's going to be months before he can recreate everything that was stolen, Marco said. And until then, he believes that his customers will go over to his competitor, Anderson's Tobacco, and he's afraid that it will put him out of business, Mr. Luigi added. But nobody makes the type of blends Donatelli sells, Stella said. You're right. The other tobacco stores suffer in comparison, Marco said. I have enough tobacco to last me until Donatelli is up and running again. I'm glad you bought me that large tin from Donatelli the other day, Stella. Until then, I'm going to help him and make sure he recovers from this, Mr. Luigi said. You know, it could be one of his competitors who stole his best tobacco, maybe hoping to run him out of business, Marco said. You might be right. Marco, I'm going to need for you and Pete to investigate this. Make sure no one else is selling Donatelli's product. I'm on it, Uncle. I'll get back to you soon, Marco responded. Mr. Luigi gave Sophie a wink as to let her know that all is well. I hope you kept the food warm, Sophie, because I'm starving. Sophie gave Mr. Luigi a warm smile. Yes, of course. I'll put the food on the table. When Sophie went to the kitchen, she could not help but to think that there was more to this than meets the eye. Marco's and Pete's investigation led to a dead end. There was no news of Donatelli's stolen tobacco being sold anywhere. After weeks of the special tobacco not surfacing, Mr. Luigi called it off, but he could not shake the feeling that something about the robbery just did not add up. After a few more months went by, Donatelli's shop was a booming business once again, and everyone had forgotten about the break-in, all except Sophie. She felt like someone had snuck right under her radar, and that really pissed her off. So she decided to keep her eyes open and her ears even closer to the ground.